Hello and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining our 2025 Look Ahead conversation on AI policy and technology. My name is Var Shankar and I lead our AI policy efforts at Enzai. Enzai is a GRC platform for organizations to align their workflows, governance, and documentation with leading AI laws, standards, and frameworks. And what an exciting time it is to be having this conversation. In 2 months, Donald Trump will be back in office. But we're seeing the Biden administration using the transition period to double down on its policies in Ukraine, on healthcare, and on AI, which of course is our topic for today. And on the AI front, Sam Altman tweeted last week, "There is no wall," meaning there is no slowdown or plateau in the progress of generative AI. Others in the industry disagree strongly, though they concede that there might be some low-hanging fruit on how to get better performance out of existing models. And at companies, we're seeing models in production and leaders increasingly focused on return on investment. So to break down what this means for organizations, we have with us our expert panel, and I'll ask that they introduce themselves. So let's start with Jamar.
Okay, thank you, Var. Hi, everyone. My name is Jamar Bronner. My background is in strategy, consulting, and tech. I worked as a management consultant at the Boston Consulting Group, BCG, and as a product manager at a YC-backed fintech payment startup in Indonesia. And I have experience working in the US, Southeast Asia, and LATAM. I am currently co-founding a edtech startup called The Foregrounds, where we want to make it easier for non-technical teams to understand AI implications and work AI into their daily workflows. We're currently focused on marketing teams, but we have plans to expand to other functional groups in the near future.
Thank you. And Monica.
Thanks, Var. It's a pleasure to be here today. Hi, folks. My name is Monica Viktorova. I'm a product manager at a large freight forwarder. So my day job is building and deploying AI and ML solutions with my team, and basically helping our people move things from A to B, which is a really exciting and tangible area of AI to be looking in. I also help lead responsible tech efforts for those products, which means that I work closely with my other colleagues in product, but also in cyber, legal, and privacy to make sure that we are building with regulatory and other risks in mind. Really looking forward to the discussion with all of you today.
Thanks. And Jason.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jason. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for AI Policy. We're a nonpartisan advocacy group that works with Congress to educate them about some of the catastrophic risks of advanced general purpose AI and to help them understand what they can do to mitigate those risks. My background is as a product safety litigator and as a data compliance manager.
Thank you, all of you, for those introductions, and really looking forward to the conversation today. So a note for our listeners, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, the LinkedIn chat. And we will either kind of wrap them into the conversation, or hopefully we'll have a bit of time for Q&A at the end. Our conversation today is 45 minutes. We're breaking it down into 3 parts. So first part is, where is AI going next year? The second part is, where is policy going? And the third part, bringing it together, is what this means for organizations and practitioners. So let's get started. So maybe I'll open it up with a question for you, Monica. Have companies yet cracked the code of how to use generative AI in their workflows? And what are we seeing as some of the good and bad use cases so far?
Yeah, so I think that's still an open question, and let's maybe start with the bad. So we are increasingly hearing about the misuse of the technology. As the technology has become more accessible and also cheaper, what we're seeing is that it's proving extremely lucrative for bad actors. We know that Gen AI is being used for illicit purposes, including voice cloning to perpetrate financial scams or to harass people. Really horrifying stuff like the creation and proliferation of child sexual assault material, or CSAM, which is currently overwhelming law enforcement efforts. And the creation and spread of huge volumes of disinformation, misinformation in social media. So in some ways, bad actors have absolutely cracked the code in using generative AI. But even, in legitimate organizations, there are high-profile failures that have happened and that we're hearing about in the news. Ultimately, Gen AI's propensity to tailor responses to give the user what they want, the kind of tail wagging the dog phenomenon, and also its propensity to hallucinate. Those are constitutive problems, and they can be very, very hard to rein in. So what we're seeing is anything from chatbots insulting customers who are turning to them for support, to the case with Air Canada, where a generative AI chatbot promised a customer, a payment that was actually outside of company policy, and a judge ended up siding with the customer, which, that's a potential legal risk for organizations out there. We also, as we're working to make these conversational agents more and more lifelike, what we're seeing is that they can have really horrible effects on very vulnerable populations. So, a recent example is Character AI, which is another conversational agent that is created and really very popular with teens and tweens. They can create a chatbot that's supposed to be a celebrity or a video game character, and chat with it. And what has been reported is that there are a lot of pro-anorexia chatbots that are encouraging really harmful behavior in users, and very dangerous restricted eating behavior. And this is an extremely vulnerable population, right? It's being used by teens and tweens, and it's an arm's length company from Google, but they did just give it another $2.7 billion in funding to continue refining and making the model more powerful. So there is this open question there of, are there enough guardrails in place? Are the guardrails robust enough? Are we protecting the most vulnerable users? Are we able to effectively combat the threat of bad actors, but also, some of the constitutive technology risks that it brings? So that's a little bit of the bad. Of course, we also know that there's good. Gen AI has made a huge splash in scientific discovery, in science and medicine. And the big one that comes to mind for me as someone with a background in biochemistry is he finds AlphaFold 2. When I was in school, it used to be the work of a whole PhD to elucidate the crystal structure of one protein. And now we have that in seconds, and we know how that protein is going to interact with other molecules. So the potential to revolutionize drug design development is huge, right? So there's some very, very positive outcomes as well. From a more meat and potatoes perspective in organizations, we know that we're deploying Gen AI pretty widely across industries. And this looks like everything from, sales and marketing benefiting from it immensely, being able to create copy, marketing materials, spin up websites really quickly, create personalized outreach to customers. It's also proven really, really useful in CRUD applications. So create, read, update, and delete, anything that you're moving data from one place to another. So regular reports that happen in finance, you need to pull data into a report, get some insights. It's a huge productivity saver. Again, as long as there are guardrails in place, there's a human in the loop that's looking over those figures, making sure everything's correct, that there's no hallucinations, that the insights are right. It has proven very, very useful. And finally, there's retrieval augmented generation. People are using Gen AI to kind of chat with documents, and this proves hugely useful for organizations that have troves and troves of documents, and where information management is maybe a challenge. And again, like this, it's very useful as long as there's proper user education. Users know that hallucinations are a possibility, and they are watching for them. They're making sure that when the model spits out an answer, it gives them, a point to a source document, that they're going into that source document and looking up the information, making sure it's correct. So all in all, again, there's good, bad, and ugly. I think for me, the takeaway here is that there is an absolute potential for productivity augmentation. and we are already starting to see it. And certainly the question will be on ROI and what the pricing plans look like for large organizations versus what we're kind of getting out of the Gen AI. But we also definitely need more robust guardrails in place, and we need user education, and we need to address hallucinations and other threats both at the development level and also at the deployment level.
Great, thanks so much. So there's plenty of reason for concern, both in companies and in society more generally. Though, as you mentioned, there's also some use cases that have caught on and provided real value. So Jason, would love to bring you in. How much of a moving target is this? We've been hearing that foundation model performance has plateaued, but we've also not just heard from Sam Altman, but also seen really impressive new potential from the O1 model from OpenAI. So what should organizations expect with the pace of change in AI going into 2025?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. So there's plenty of technological innovation that's still on its way to being productized, right? Even if we never had another improvement in the foundation models again, there's a lot of work to be done in figuring out how organizations can exploit them, figuring out new market niches that these technologies open up. And there's also a lot of unhobbling to be done. Right now, when you interact with a foundation model, it's usually in a very specific way. Maybe you type some text into a text box. It's a small amount of text. You get an instant response, kind of the first thing off of the AI's mind, so to speak. But it's not necessary to interact with the AI in that way, right? Increasingly, we're going to see larger context windows. We're going to see the AI pausing to think for several minutes before giving an important response. We're going to see AIs talking with themselves, kind of prompting themselves to refine their reasoning before they give you a final answer. We're going to see multimedia, right? I mean, increasingly there's live voice interaction, live video interaction. AI is generating music. AI is controlling vehicles. AIs could be integrated with robotic arms and other robotic tools to have more of an impact in the physical world. So none of this requires an improvement in the performance or the capabilities of foundation models. This is just the organic deployment and development of what's already out there. That said, even if there's a temporary slowdown in the scaling of some of these models, that's not going to control the indefinite future. I mean, there are bottlenecks coming up. There's reasons to be skeptical that we'll be able to continue to provide electricity and data and funding on the scale that smooth exponential growth would require. But just because we don't have perfectly smooth exponential growth doesn't mean we won't see linear growth, right? Even a very slow year for AI still probably looks like 2025's foundational models being 20 or 30 or 50% more powerful than they were last year. So I think it's extremely unlikely that we literally flatline. Just because some of the companies have been making noises that they're disappointed with the performance of their latest models doesn't mean that those models are literally identical in performance to the previous versions. There's been a conspicuous lack of public data around the supposed underperformance. So we don't know exactly how much they've been investing in these new models or exactly how much they're underperforming.
Great. And both on the points of more productive collaboration between people and AI models, as well as to strengthen guardrails on AI. One of the best ways to do that is to ensure appropriate human oversight. There's, of course, a lively debate on what constitutes appropriate human oversight in different contexts. And AI effects on workforce have been unpredictable. So we've seen generative AI make more junior programmers more productive, but as a consequence also made their skills less rare. So would love to bring Jamar in on this. Could you give us an overview of how people have been adapting to the skills required in the AI age so far? And in your view, is it sufficient?
Yeah, that's a good question, Var. I'd say the short answer to how they've been adapting is inconsistently, and is it sufficient? Probably no. And that's caused a lot of heartburn and unease for a lot of folks at companies of all sizes who are trying to make sense of what comes next, as well as like how to just kind of keep treading water in the current state, right? So BCG surveyed around 1,400 senior level executives at the beginning of the year and found that 89% of those executives marked Gen AI as a strategic priority, a key priority for the year. And yet only around 6% had any sort of meaningful upskilling plan for their organization to prepare themselves for AI. And like Monica said, that's a big gap and a big concern, right? McKinsey did something similar. They had a study that found roughly 18% of organizations had a responsible AI governance policy or plan. And with those big deltas in terms of where the ambition lies and where the kind of the current state is in terms of the scaffolding and governance needed, I think that reveals that this is going to be kind of an iterative process and something that we need to continue to push on. Push on AI education, push on standardization across the organization. You'd mentioned that junior developers are leveraging Gen AI. There's tools like Cursor and GitHub Copilot that are seeing these productivity gains that are great. And I think there's a couple of ways of viewing that from an organizational point of view. One is just, is the productivity gains actually being tracked or monitored from a real like ROI perspective? By that I mean, this junior AI, junior developer may have discovered Cursor, may have started using it, may have found 10, 15 hours of a week of savings. But does the organization know that? Is that a best practice that's scaled across the organization? Or does that junior developer get to kick back and kind of go slower, on the rest of their code that they're building? That's one way of thinking about this. Like, is the ROI actively being tracked? The other concern here is risk mitigation, right? If you're using Gen AI, if you're using these tools in a non-standardized way, you're exposing your organization to potential concerns or risks that could exacerbate and could snowball very quickly if there's not any sort of backwards testing, any sort of human oversight, any sort of analysis there, just to make sure that there's proper safeguards in place to mitigate the risk. I think the other aspect of that is just thinking about the skill building and kind of what the future looks like if these tools are being leveraged more and more. The junior developer that has access to these tools are now kind of like AI enabled developers, where they can start to think about problems and start to think about solutions in a different way, right? The boilerplate code, these maybe the initial spinning up of new development environments, et cetera, aren't necessarily like what a junior engineer is tasked to doing it anymore. Maybe it's more the creative problem solving, solution design, effective collaboration with AI. And this is a different skill set, right? The job description starts to look a bit different for a junior engineer. And that requires everyone from HR to tech leadership, et cetera, really understanding and appreciating that nuance of what they should be performance testing and what they should be evaluating these employees to do in this new age of having co-pilots, having AI agents doing more for the organization. And I think the final thing here is that there's a constant undertone or undercurrent when we start thinking about like, what does AI mean in the workforce and in workforce development, that the headlines are showing that big companies are laying off troves and troves of employees, and that's the big concern, right? Is AI going to take my job? Am I going to lose out to a machine? And I think that concern is valid. Don't get me wrong, that there are going to be areas of an organization that just get reallocated resources as a result of AI and new opportunities. But I think like what Monica said, and even what Jason said, is that there's new opportunities coming down the pipeline. Human oversight is so critical and so crucial to making sure that these technologies are deployed effectively, that the real onus on an organization and a responsible organization is looking at this as an opportunity to reimagine what workplace, what workflows look like, what the job description looks like, what the expectations of employee and personnel are to be effective, and putting the right people in place so that AI becomes an enabler to work that's being done, not a replacement to bodies in the room.
Yeah, and thanks, Jamar, for all. Really appreciate all the important work that you're doing, helping with those upskilling efforts within organizations as well. So switching gears now to the policy side, and I'll go to Jason first because his organization has great visibility on this. We have a new administration in the White House come January. On AI policy, what do you expect them to do, and what do you want them to do?
Thanks. Yeah, these are difficult questions. There was little discussion of AI on the campaign trail, only a cryptic mention in the Republican Party platform about replacing Biden's AI executive order with AI that's built on free speech and human flourishing. So the free speech seems to be pushed back both against, a general sense of concern over disinformation bleeding into political censorship, or maybe a sense of what you're not supposed to say because it's politically incorrect. And then the human flourishing hasn't been identified despite repeated requests by the media. It could point to some comments coming out of the Vatican around AI and human flourishing. It could point to some of the Chicago School of Economics work on kind of family welfare in the context of what kinds of jobs can help people flourish. It's really kind of a mystery. And there's a diverse cast of advisors that might have sway within the Trump administration that have radically different approaches to AI. Elon Musk has endorsed California's Senate Bill 1047. He's suing OpenAI for not taking safety concerns seriously enough. So if an Elon Musk type character is steering Trump administration AI policy, we'd expect to see a continuation or even an intensification of the efforts to provide guardrails and ensure frequent testing of the most advanced models and so on. On the other hand, Peter Thiel is also influential in the Trump administration and seems to have little or no interest in those issues. In between, you have people like J.D. Vance, who is relatively hostile to some of the big tech companies, but not necessarily on AI safety grounds, more on antitrust grounds. So he might wind up sort of reining in some of the largest companies that are working on AI for reasons that are not directly related to some of the threats posed by AI. So it's very hard to tell what the Trump administration is going to do. What we hope they do is continue the US's leadership in the world through things like the AI Safety Institute, which has bipartisan support and which sort of was well received by a global coalition in San Francisco just last week. They're working on collaborating with our innovative companies to understand what kinds of tests are effective, understand what kinds of safety testing is needed, to really design a set of security guardrails that will take us into the next decade. As Commerce Secretary Raimondo warned, humanity could be its own undoing if it sleepwalks blindly into these next steps of technology. So our slogan at the Center for AI Policy is to require safe AI. It's not that we shouldn't build the technology, it's just that we should do so safely.
Great. Yeah. It's very, very kind of difficult to determine what's going to happen with AI policy in the new administration. I've seen some reports that Elon Musk had been joining calls with the CEO of Google and with leaders like Zelensky, which is kind of concerning, regardless of where your political views are. But we'll kind of see where things go. Monica, would love your reaction on this. From maybe you can provide a European perspective. Could you comment on whether you expect very different approaches in the US and EU, and how companies might be able to navigate that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think to Jason's point, it probably is hard right now to know exactly what the US is going to do. But even, prior to the election, the executive order was something that stressed voluntary compliance. So I think the key difference for me is the AI Act has pretty strict penalties in terms of like multi-million-dollar fines. for non-compliance, whereas the executive order was something that really was about the tech industry kind of policing itself and was more principles-based. Whether we're looking at, it's kind of continuing on or becoming watered down or what have you, what I doubt would happen is that it would that there would be a move to have similar kinds of penalties to the AI Act. I do think that for most large companies that have a multinational footprint, it's not just the executive order and the AI Act that are of concern. There's regulations that are cropping up in China and Brazil and Australia, and this very patchy regulatory environment does provide more friction. So it will mean that there will be more challenge for product teams and also for executives to decide what will product look like, where are we going to roll out first, how are we going to roll out, will the product have the same features in all jurisdictions, will it even have the same underlying architecture, can we use the same models in all our jurisdictions, and the answer currently to that might be no. And so it will mean that product roadmaps will need to be devised with more kind of regulatory concern in mind. When GDPR landed in 2018, what we saw is that the EU Commission really focused on enforcement in kind of these big splashy cases and handing down a couple of big fines to sort of scare everybody into kind of knowing that they mean business. And there's certainly been speculation that the enforcement of the AI Act will kind of go the same way. So one of the open questions is like, what are those big cases going to be? What will be the focus of enforcement, especially early enforcement? Will be the target of that. I think that's definitely going to have an effect, and it's going to also impact how organizations, especially multinationals, think about their products and think about deployment.
Great. And Jamar, so I think, we're seeing uncertainty in terms of laws and policies. There are some strategies that organizations could use to navigate these. In the EU, of course, it's kind of, the EU AI Act is quite clear about what its requirements are, though the ways in which that compliance is demonstrated, they're still laying out in a lot of cases. So a lot of the development of best practices actually happens in organizations and among organizations and industry organizations. So they develop responsible AI practices together. What sources and networks should organizations look to for these kinds of best practices?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I'd say, we're in an interesting time because a lot of this, like you said, is kind of happening in real time, right? We're just now seeing the potential of this technology over the past couple of years, right? We don't have, at BCG, I worked on a lot of digital transformation cases where, we had past history of, roughly a decade of at least pioneering companies starting to think about what, how to transition, core activities into a digital space and whatnot. I think in this case, what we have is best practices coming from not the traditional maybe sources of best practice, my I guess professional alma mater excluded, right? The management consulting firms, the business schools, they just don't have enough data right now to really say what is a best practice. It's often coming from case studies of these well-resourced organizations that have deployed it and seen the fruits of their labor, sometimes advised by consulting firms, but also just kind of through their own learning and their own challenges as well. So I've mostly seen, or we at the Foregrounds have mostly seen kind of three areas where these best practices or these learnings are coming from. One is from the foundational LLMs themselves. They're building out educational arms. Cohere has what's called LLM University. OpenAI has something similar to educate and to prepare organizations on understanding, what is best in class, what are the best practices, how can they deploy this, how can they have the right scaffolding and support organization-wide from a governance perspective, as well as AI education partners like the Foregrounds and other firms that are compiling these case studies, really evaluating what worked well, what didn't, talking to the experts, talking to the folks who led these AI transformation initiatives to understand, okay, how can this be democratized? How can these learnings be shared to other companies that are trying to model their own success cases off of them? The other one is internal, AI ethics organizations, AI governance teams that are first responsible for ensuring compliance, but they're also expected to create responsible AI deployment and cross-functional alignment. And often that means, sharing these best practices, sharing these case studies that might have worked well in one department, but how do we create other business units, other functions to find the same sort of success within their organization. And then finally, what Jason intimated with what he's doing from a government-facing institution as well as governments themselves globally, we're seeing that these best practices are emerging from just conversations between the various stakeholders. Both what Center for AI Policy is doing, as well as you look at governments like Singapore that put together an AI strategy. They were one of the earlier ones. I spent time in Singapore, so I was fairly close to that when they announced their national AI strategy in 2019. And then they recently updated it about a year ago after having roughly 300 conversations with folks in industry, folks in research institutions, to try to piece together these fairly fragmented stakeholders, but making sure that there is that alignment between industry, research, infrastructure, government, international partners. And so I think we can start to look at what governments are doing and what sorts of stakeholder alignment they're trying to create. When we look at Singapore, Germany has done something similar, as well as in the US, nonprofits, NGOs that are trying to create that alignment and try to ensure responsible AI deployment.
Thanks, Jamar. And I'll stick with you as we move to the organizational implications section, which is our final of the 3 sections. So one thing that we've heard from the incoming administration is in the US is a focus on promoting entrepreneurship and growth. And we've heard from Monica earlier that scientific research is an area where AI has significant potential, and there are others as well. What are some of those industries or use cases where you think we might see entrepreneurial breakthroughs with AI next year?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting question because if we couch this in what for some, I guess, was a surprise in the presidential election, this means that there's going to be some additional investments in some places that have just been historically prioritized by conservative administrations, as well as the added influence of Elon, as Jason mentioned, Elon Musk being involved, with him being a billionaire investor who has increasingly been involved in AI and advanced robotics. This means that the investments could look like what's traditional for conservative platforms, right? So investments in defense, investments in advanced manufacturing, as long as it doesn't take away blue collar jobs, but maybe enables more kind of onshoring of these sorts of manufacturing capabilities. I think that's what I would expect to see from an entrepreneurial point of view. That's being pushed by the administration side. So companies like Anduril, Palantir in the defense space, and companies of that that are deploying AI in advanced manufacturing and robotics. There's Figure, there's Elon Musk's companies and what they're doing with humanoid robotics. I think that's very interesting from an industrial manufacturing point of view. I think there is exciting potential in these spaces like healthcare and education, but I'm not sure if the expansion of tech in those areas will be as widely supported under this new administration as other administrations, just given what we've seen in the past with conservative administrations and what they push for. That's, I think, an open question. As far as the broader entrepreneurial lens, though, I'd say industries that are going to be booming over the next 4 years are anything in the creative space where you see almost like a new crop or a new class of entrepreneurs and creators that are leveraging these tools, whether it's in music generation, video production, image creation, et cetera, that they are going to become experts in leveraging these tools the same way that they were experts in leveraging, SaaS-based products. So I think that's what's really interesting, is that it's lowering maybe the expert curve or the barrier to entry for some of these new areas, and really lowering the barrier for entrepreneurship in general. If you can use a GitHub Copilot or one of these coding copilots to launch a product overnight or in a weekend rather than over 6 months using a dev team or with in-house support, I think that's going to create new entrepreneurship angles and maybe reduce the friction in entrepreneurship. But as far as industries that are being supported by this administration, I think it is going to be in spaces like defense and manufacturing.
And it would be great to see a new crop of entrepreneurs. But of course, one of the concerns with AI is potential winner-take-all effects. So large organizations in already regulated industries like finance, healthcare, and energy, they already have a lot of data. They have a lot of know-how. They know how to run large programs. And so big tech companies, as well as leading companies in their respective industries, often have an advantage. So Monica, given this reality, how can we level the playing field, and what can smaller companies and entrepreneurs learn from these bigger companies on how to use AI?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I think there's a couple of moving pieces here. The first one is if we're talking specifically about Gen AI, then technology companies and large organizations absolutely will have an edge. Again, as you mentioned, they've got more data, and of course, and anything that's actually building a model or improving it from scratch, you need so much computing power, you need so much financing. So that's going to be companies that have huge amounts of financial backing. So there is going to be a concentration of power there in terms of Gen AI. But if we zoom out a little bit and we look at AI and ML more broadly, we know that there's a whole cottage industry of AI startups and scale-ups that are building in niche areas and solving specific problems. In the logistics industry where I work, for example, this looks like everything from using AI and route optimization to demand forecasting. So there's lots of use cases that are kind of being worked on, and I think what we'll see is something similar happening with Gen AI as well. To Jamar's point, there is a little bit less of a barrier, and I also think that a lot of companies that already offer solutions in AI are tacking on Gen AI solutions to their offering for customers. So for smaller organizations, I think the key is going to be, trying to understand what is Gen AI good at and what can it actually do for my business specifically. And this will mean anything from, do we need a couple of licenses for people in IT, for people in marketing? If we already use Microsoft, can we start using Copilot? For a smaller organization, there's going to be a cost benefit around, do we try to build anything in-house or do we go off the shelf? And for many of them, off the shelf will be cheaper. So in terms of what they can kind of learn from larger organizations, I think this is where procurement and vendor management starts to become a lot more important, where you are vetting the vendors that you're taking on and making sure that those vendors give you confidence in not just the technical aspects of the product, but that they are also thinking about the downstream risks, that they are aware of regulation, that they can effectively work with you, not just to integrate your data, but that they've got good cybersecurity practices, and from a legal perspective, they know what they can deploy and where. So I think for smaller organizations, there's lots of room to use AI startups and scale-ups that provide the kinds of solutions that they need and that are more targeted and can be adapted to their business, but it will kind of come down to making sure that they're vetting those vendors. And from a government policy perspective, I think there's lots of room there to also give grants to organizations like NGOs and making sure that there is access to Gen AI tools where they can make a difference.
Thanks so much. And I'm just keeping an eye on the time here. I think this might have to be our final question. So Jason, as we see increased agency for AI systems in organizations, as well as the rise of agentic AI, how should executives promote win-win human-AI collaboration?
Yeah, it's really tricky to make sure that humans maintain meaningful influence over the final decisions. There's psychological studies showing that AIs are often perceived as more objective and therefore more trustworthy. So even if you, in good faith, set up a system where An AI makes a recommendation, and then the human decides whether to approve the recommendation. It's often easier to just approve the recommendation. It's often more comfortable to approve the recommendation. So having a human in the loop may not be enough to get that kind of win-win interaction. If you wouldn't want the AI entirely replacing human judgment, then you need to build a role for the humans fundamentally into the structure of the decision-making process, not just a final approve or an option to appeal or something like that. Some of the ways you can do that are by preventing your AI agents from making a recommendation at all about what the final action should be. Instead, you can treat them as oracle AIs that are offering descriptions of the situation in a way that's still helpful to the human and allows the human to make a decision. So the AI might rate various features of the problem that the human is trying to make a decision about. The AI might summarize documents or highlight the documents that seem most relevant for the human to study. And those are some ways of sort of pressuring the human into taking a look at the evidence and using their independent judgment to make the decision. Another way of looking at this problem is to think about the difference between tasks and jobs. So, it's likely that AI will be better at automating particular tasks, and these tasks may not line up neatly with entire jobs, right? It might be good at automating some parts of a job and not other parts of a job. So if you're looking to integrate AI into your organization, then you might want to look for ways that you can restructure or reorganize what tasks are traditionally considered to be part of a job, so that you have humans who are doing a new collection of tasks, all of which are, for the moment, still best done by humans, and the AI doing tasks that are best done by AI, even if these don't overlap tightly with traditional job categories. We are concerned at the Center for AI Policy that in the long run, there will be fewer and fewer tasks that are best done by humans, because there doesn't seem to be an upper limit to how intelligent artificial intelligence can get. But for the next couple of years, at least, there will be opportunities to restructure jobs in this way.
Thanks so much, Jason. So since our focus here is on what organizations should do going into next year, I would love for us to conclude with one takeaway from each of you on how organizations should manage risks from AI. And so let's go with you first, Jason.
I would say start building the talent pipeline now. The people you have at your organization today probably don't have all of the skills they need to cope with the threats coming next year or 5 years from now. And it takes time to build the right team and get those skills. So either invest in your people to teach them more about the risks of AI beyond what they would just learn organically on the job, or hire new people and add them to your team.
Thank you. Monica.
Yeah, so I think to build on what Jason is saying, and also what Jamar mentioned earlier, I think upskilling is going to be critically important. And for me, I think where upskilling is really, really valuable is product managers and product owners. They really are the glue between a lot of different stakeholders, from business stakeholders or customer stakeholders and users to cyber, privacy, legal, and risk functions in the organization that all need to collaborate going forward in order to make sure that solutions are developed responsibly, and also that they are deployed in ways that de-risk the organization and make sure that they're going to make the most strategic sense and get the most out of the ROI. So I really do think that in terms of focusing upskilling, product managers and product owners really need to have a good handle on best practices for responsible AI, and at least some kind of foundational knowledge around what the regulatory landscape looks like.
Great. Jamar.
Yeah, and I think just building upon what Monica said, this cross-functional nature of everything that's going on with new products being deployed with AI, it's very important that we consider AI governance to be in continual and continuous process rather than just a one-time checkbox. I think as these new technologies come into light, as new capabilities become available, we need to remember that this requires flexible frameworks. It requires us to think with a solution-oriented mindset, but also a consistent review of training data sources, output accountability mechanisms, making sure that the guardrails are in place and that they're regularly checked against whatever the new product team puts out or whatever new opportunities emerge.
Great, thank you so much. So to conclude briefly, going into next year, there will be continued advancements in AI capabilities, regardless of whether it's because existing models, we're getting better performance out of existing models, or whether there are better models and new models coming out. We know that the EU is getting serious about the AI Act, so global organizations will need to be ready, and organizations will need a sustained focus on education, on talent, and on appropriate human oversight. So thanks so much to our listeners for joining us. Thank you to our panelists, and hope everybody has a great rest of their week. And to our American listeners, hope you travel safe and have a happy Thanksgiving. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bar. Thanks, everyone.